The sound of gunfire echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory as Pearl Randall tightened her grip on the reins, urging her horse forward through the tall grass. The year was 1876, and the setting sun cast long shadows over the rolling landscape surrounding the small settlement of Granite. Pearl's heart pounded in her chest as she spotted a lone figure slumped against a boulder near the creek bed, his horse grazing nervously nearby. "Hello," she called out, approaching cautiously. "Are you hurt, mister?" When the man didn't respond, Pearl dismounted and moved closer. He was dressed in worn denim and leather, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. Blood had seeped through his shirt on the right side, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. "I'm going to help you," she said, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" The man's head tilted slightly, revealing a face weathered by sun and hardship. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, met hers briefly before his lids fluttered closed. "Madam," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Much obliged." Pearl quickly assessed the situation. The gunshot wound in his side didn't appear to have hit anything vital, but he had lost a considerable amount of blood. The nearest doctor was in Laramie, a good day's ride away. She would have to tend to him herself, at least for now. "I'm going to get you to my cabin," she said, more to herself than to him. "It's not far." The man was tall and solidly built, and Pearl knew she couldn't lift him onto her horse alone. Instead, she fashioned a travois from branches and her spare blanket, securing it to her saddle. With considerable effort, she managed to drag the unconscious cowboy onto the makeshift stretcher. The journey back to her homestead took longer than Pearl had anticipated. The sun had fully set by the time her modest cabin came into view, nestled against a small copse of trees with a creek running nearby. Her dog, Rusty, barked a welcome as she approached, then whined uncertainly at the scent of blood. "It's all right, boy," Pearl soothed, dismounting. "We've got a visitor who needs help." Getting the cowboy into her cabin proved another challenge, but Pearl was no stranger to hard work. At 24, she had been managing her small ranch alone since her father's passing 3 years earlier. She dragged the wounded man inside and, with a final surge of strength, heaved him onto her bed. Working quickly, Pearl lit several lamps and gathered her medical supplies. She cut away the man's bloodied shirt, revealing a lean, muscled torso marred by the angry wound in his side and several old scars that told their own stories of a hard life. "You've seen your share of trouble, haven't you?" she murmured, cleaning the wound with whiskey. The man flinched but didn't wake as she extracted the bullet, a small lead slug that had lodged against a rib. Pearl stitched the wound with steady hands, then bandaged it tightly. When she had finished, she pulled a chair beside the bed and studied her patient. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. Pearl guessed he was around 30, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd lived hard years. "Who are you?" she wondered aloud, gently removing his gun belt and setting it aside. "And who was shooting at you?" As if in answer, the man stirred, his eyes opening briefly. "Mitchell," he mumbled. "Mitchell Harding." "Well, Mr. Harding," Pearl replied, though she doubted he could hear her. "I'm Pearl Randall, and you're safe now." For 3 days, Mitchell Harding drifted between consciousness and fevered sleep. Pearl tended him diligently, changing his bandages, spooning water between his cracked lips, and applying cool compresses when fever threatened to claim him. She slept on a pallet by the hearth, rising frequently to check on her patient. On the morning of the 4th day, Pearl was stirring a pot of broth when she heard movement from the bed. She turned to find Mitchell attempting to sit up, his face pale with the effort. "Easy now," she cautioned, moving quickly to his side. "You'll tear those stitches." Mitchell's eyes focused on her, clear for the first time since she'd found him. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "My cabin, about 10 miles outside of Granite," Pearl explained, helping him to lie back against the pillows. "I found you near Blackwater Creek with a bullet in your side." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I remember writing. Being ambushed." His hand moved instinctively to his side, wincing as his fingers encountered the bandaged wound. "You're lucky it wasn't worse," Pearl said. "Another inch to the left, and I'd be digging your grave instead of feeding you broth." A ghost of a smile crossed Mitchell's face. "Straight-talking woman, aren't you?" Pearl shrugged. No point in sugar-coating things out here. She ladled some broth into a bowl. Think you can eat something? When Mitchell tried to take the bowl, his hands shook so violently that hot liquid sloshed over the rim. Pearl quickly reclaimed it before he could spill the entire contents. I can manage, he protested, but his weakness betrayed him. Clearly, Pearl replied dryly. She sat on the edge of the bed and lifted a spoonful of broth to his lips. Your pride isn't worth starving over, Mr. Harding. Mitchell's jaw tightened, but after a moment's hesitation, he allowed her to feed him. Mitchell, he said between spoonfuls. Or Mitch. Mr. Harding was my father. Pearl nodded. And I'm Pearl. Pearl Randall. You live here alone, Miss Randall? Mitchell asked, his eyes taking in the modest but tidy cabin. I do now, she answered. My father passed 3 years ago. I've kept the place going since then. Mitchell's eyes widened slightly. That's no small feat for a woman on her own. I manage, Pearl said, offering another spoonful of broth. And I'm not completely alone. I've got Rusty, good neighbors when I need them, and enough stubbornness to make up for what I lack in size. A genuine smile spread across Mitchell's face, transforming his features. I don't doubt that for a second. Over the next several days, Mitchell gradually regained his strength. His hands still trembled when he tried to hold anything, an after effect of the blood loss and trauma, Pearl supposed. She continued to help him eat, moving from broth to more substantial fare as his appetite improved. You're a good cook, Mitchell commented one evening as Pearl fed him a stew of rabbit and wild onions. Better than I deserve, given the trouble I've brought to your door. Pearl raised an eyebrow. Speaking of trouble, you still haven't told me who put that bullet in you or why. Mitchell's expression darkened. Men who work for Victor Blackfield. He owns most of the land around these parts, or thinks he does. Pearl nodded grimly. I know Blackfield. He's been trying to buy my place since my father died. Sends his foreman around every few months with an offer that gets lower each time. That sounds like Victor, Mitchell agreed. He doesn't take kindly to being refused. Is that what happened to you? You refused him something. Mitchell hesitated, setting down his spoon. His hands were steadier now, though still not entirely reliable. I used to ride for him, he admitted. For about 2 years. I've seen how he operates, forcing out small ranchers, intimidating homesteaders, bribing officials. When I decided I couldn't stomach it anymore and quit, he took it personally. Said I knew too much. Pearl studied him thoughtfully. So you're running from him? Not running. Mitchell corrected, a flash of pride in his eyes. I was headed to Cheyenne to speak with a federal marshal I know. Blackfield has been rustling cattle and worse. I've got evidence, names, dates. Enough to put him away for good. And his men tried to stop you, Pearl concluded. They would have succeeded if you hadn't come along. Mitchell's gaze was intense. I owe you my life, Pearl Randall. Pearl felt a flush creep up her neck under his scrutiny. Anyone would have done the same. No, Mitchell said softly. Not anyone. Most would have ridden on by or finished the job themselves for the reward Blackfield's surely offering. The days stretched into a week, then 2. Pearl continued her ranch chores, tending the small herd of cattle, caring for her vegetable garden, and hunting when necessary. Each evening, she returned to find Mitchell a little stronger, a little more steady on his feet. He began to help around the cabin in small ways, his hands gradually ceasing their trembling. He whittled a new handle for her broken broom, repaired a loose floorboard she'd been meaning to fix, and surprised her one afternoon by having dinner ready when she returned from checking her fence line. It's not much, he apologized as she entered the cabin to the aroma of cooking. Just beans and bacon, but I figured you deserved a night off from cooking. Pearl stood in the doorway, momentarily speechless. It had been so long since anyone had done something for her, something thoughtful and unexpected. Thank you, she said finally, hanging her hat on the peg by the door. It smells wonderful. They ate together at her small table, talking easily about the day's work. Pearl found herself laughing at Mitchell's stories of his younger days, riding in cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, working on ranches across the territories. What about you? Mitchell asked, refilling her coffee cup. Have you always lived in Wyoming? Pearl nodded. Born and raised. My parents came out from Pennsylvania in '52, right after they married. My mother died when I was 12 influenza. Pa and I managed together after that. He must have been proud of you, Mitchell said. The way you've kept this place going. A smile touched Pearl's lips. He taught me everything I know. Said a woman should be able to stand on her own 2 feet in this world, especially out west. Wise man, Mitchell agreed, his eyes lingering on her face. You're quite something, Pearl Randall. Pearl felt that unfamiliar flush again and changed the subject. Your wound is healing well. I expect you'll be ready to travel to Cheyenne soon. Something like disappointment flickered across Mitchell's features. I suppose I should. Those papers aren't getting to the marshal on their own. The thought of Mitchell leaving created an unexpected hollowness in Pearl's chest. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his voice, to the way he filled her once lonely cabin with warmth. Where are these papers? She asked, pushing aside the unsettling feeling. Hidden in my saddlebag, Mitchell replied. I checked yesterday when I groomed my horse. They're still there, safe and sound. Pearl hesitated, then voiced the concern that had been growing in her mind. Blackfield's men will be watching for you. If they realize you survived, they'll try again. Mitchell's jaw tightened. I know, but I can't let that stop me. Too many people have suffered under Blackfield's rule. Someone has to stand up to him. Then I'm coming with you, Pearl declared, surprising herself as much as Mitchell. Absolutely not, Mitchell protested. It's too dangerous. I won't put you at risk. I'm already at risk, Pearl pointed out. I helped you. If Blackfield finds out, do you think he'll just let that go? Besides, 2 riders are less suspicious than 1, and I know every trail and shortcut between here and Cheyenne. Mitchell shook his head, but Pearl could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Pearl, I'm not asking permission, Mitchell Harding, she interrupted. I'm telling you how it's going to be. We leave at first light, day after tomorrow. For a moment, Mitchell looked as though he might continue arguing, but then a slow smile spread across his face. You really are the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Pearl returned his smile. You have no idea. The day before their planned departure, Pearl rode into Granite to purchase supplies and gather any information she could about Blackfield's men. The small town consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses, but news traveled fast in such places. As Pearl tied her horse outside the general store, she noticed 2 unfamiliar men lounging against the hitching post of the saloon across the street. Something about their watchful posture set her nerves on edge. Inside the store, Mr. Jenkins greeted her warmly. Miss Pearl, haven't seen you in a spell. How's that garden of yours coming along? Just fine, Mr. Jenkins, Pearl replied, selecting items from the shelves. I'll need some coffee, flour, and ammunition if you have it. Mr. Jenkins raised an eyebrow at the last request, but asked no questions as he gathered her supplies. Heard anything from that no-good Blackfield lately? He asked in a lowered voice. Word is he's on the warpath about something. Pearl kept her expression neutral. Oh, what's got him riled up this time? One of his men went missing a couple weeks back. Mitchell Harding, you remember him? Used to stop in here sometimes. Dark hair, tall fellow, polite unlike most of Blackfield's bunch. Mr. Jenkins leaned closer. Rumor has it he was carrying something Blackfield wants back real bad. There's a reward out for information on his whereabouts. Pearl's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. Can't say I recall him specifically. Blackfield has so many men riding for him these days. As Mr. Jenkins wrapped her purchases, Pearl casually asked, Those men across the street they knew in town? The storekeeper glanced out the window. Showed up 3 days ago. Been asking questions, drinking at the saloon, watching the comings and goings. Blackfield's men, no doubt about it. Pearl paid for her supplies and thanked Mr. Jenkins for the information. She loaded her purchases into her saddlebags, acutely aware of the men's eyes on her back. As she mounted her horse, one of them pushed away from the hitching post and approached. Afternoon, madam, he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. Fine day, isn't it? Pearl nodded curtly. It is. If you'll excuse me, I've got a long ride ahead. The man stepped closer, placing a hand on her horse's bridle. Now, don't be in such a hurry. My friend and I are new in these parts. Looking for someone, actually. Thought you might be able to help us. Pearl's hand drifted casually toward the rifle secured to her saddle. I doubt it. I keep to myself mostly. The fellow we're looking for might have passed through recently. Tall man, dark hair, goes by Mitchell Harding. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. There's good money for anyone who can point us in the right direction. Never heard of him, Pearl said flatly. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like my horse back. For a tense moment, the man didn't move. Then, with deliberate slowness, he released the bridle. "If you do happen to hear anything, we're staying at the saloon. Name's Fletcher. Jake Fletcher. I'll keep that in mind," Pearl replied, turning her horse away from the man. She forced herself to ride at an unhurried pace until she was out of town, then urged her mount into a gallop, taking a circuitous route back to her cabin in case she was followed. Mitchell was splitting firewood when Pearl returned, his strength nearly fully restored. He set down the axe as she dismounted, immediately noticing her troubled expression. "What happened?" he asked, taking the reins and leading her horse to the small stable. Pearl recounted her encounter in town as they unloaded her supplies. Mitchell's face grew grim as she described Fletcher and his companion. "I know them," he confirmed. "Fletcher's Blackfield's best tracker. If he's in Granite, they're closing in. We need to leave tonight," Pearl decided. "They'll be watching the roads by morning." As darkness fell, Pearl and Mitchell prepared for their journey. They packed only essentials, planning to travel light and fast. Pearl left food for Rusty, though the dog would likely hunt for himself until she returned. "Are you sure about this?" Mitchell asked as they saddled their horses under the cover of night. "It's not too late to change your mind. You could stay here, claim you never saw me if they come asking." Pearl secured her rifle and turned to face him. In the moonlight, his features were softly shadowed, his eyes reflecting her own resolve. "I'm sure," she said simply. "Some things are worth fighting for." Mitchell stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Pearl Randall, you are the bravest person I've ever known." The warmth of his touch sent a current through Pearl's body. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, and realized with startling clarity that she wanted him to. Instead, he dropped his hand and turned back to his horse. "We should get moving," he said, his voice rougher than before. "We've got a long ride ahead of us." They rode through the night, keeping to lesser-known trails and avoiding the main roads. Pearl led the way, grateful for her intimate knowledge of the terrain. By dawn, they had covered considerable ground, the outline of the Laramie Mountains visible against the lightening sky. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Pearl decided, directing them toward a sheltered hollow near a small spring. "The horses need it, and so do we." They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might be spotted. After tending to the horses, they shared a simple meal of jerky, dried fruit, and water from the spring. "How far to Cheyenne from here?" Mitchell asked, scanning their surroundings with watchful eyes. 2 days if we push hard," Pearl answered. "Longer if we keep to the back trails, which I think we should. There's an old line shack about 15 miles southeast where we can spend tonight. It's abandoned, but still sound." Mitchell nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've been a godsend, Pearl. Not just for saving my life, but for everything since." Pearl busied herself repacking their supplies, uncomfortable with his gratitude. "You'd have done the same for me." "Would I?" Mitchell mused. "I'd like to think so, but I'm not so sure. There was a time when I wouldn't have stopped for a stranger, wouldn't have risked my neck for someone else's fight. Working for Blackfield changed me, and not for the better." Pearl glanced up, surprised by his candor. "Why did you work for him in the first place?" Mitchell's eyes grew distant. "Came west after the war. I fought for the Union, got wounded at Antietam. When I recovered, there wasn't much waiting for me back home in Ohio. Drifted for years, taking whatever work I could find. When I landed in Wyoming, Blackfield was hiring. Paid well, asked few questions." He sighed. "It was easy at first to look the other way, to tell myself I was just following orders. But after a while, you either become the kind of man who can live with that, or you don't. And you couldn't," Pearl concluded softly. Mitchell met her gaze. "No, I couldn't. When I saw him burn out the Wilsons' good people with young children just because they wouldn't sell their water rights, something broke inside me. I knew I had to do something." Pearl reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "You are doing something, and you're not alone anymore." Mitchell turned his hand to clasp hers, his fingers warm and strong. "No," he agreed quietly. "I'm not alone." They reached the lined shack by nightfall, a small, weathered structure nestled among a stand of pines. Pearl had used it occasionally during hunting trips, and while basic, it offered shelter and relative safety. Mitchell insisted on checking the interior first, his gun drawn as he entered the single room. Finding it empty, he helped Pearl bring in their supplies while she started a small fire in the stone hearth. The shack contained little besides a rough wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a narrow cot. Mitchell immediately offered Pearl the cot, preparing to make himself comfortable on the floor. "Don't be ridiculous," Pearl protested. "You're still healing. You take the cot." "I'm not taking the bed while a lady sleeps on the floor," Mitchell insisted stubbornly. Pearl planted her hands on her hips. "Then we'll share it. It's narrow but big enough for two if we're careful. We're both adults, and it's just for sleeping." Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't argue further. After a simple dinner, they settled awkwardly onto the cot, both fully clothed, lying back to back with a blanket drawn over them. Pearl was acutely aware of Mitchell's solid warmth behind her, the rhythm of his breathing, the clean scent of his skin. Sleep seemed impossible with her nerves so alive, her heart beating an unfamiliar cadence. "Pearl." Mitchell's voice was soft in the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," she whispered back. "I never asked why you live alone. A woman like you, smart, capable, beautiful, you must have had suitors." The unexpected question caught Pearl off guard. "There was someone once," she admitted. "Thomas Everett. We were to be married 4 years ago." "What happened?" Pearl stared into the dying embers of the fire. "He changed his mind. Decided he couldn't marry a woman who preferred working a ranch to keeping house. Said I was too independent, too stubborn. That no man would want a wife who could outshoot and outride him." Mitchell was silent for a long moment. "He was a fool," he said finally, his voice low and fierce. "Any man worth his salt would be proud to have a partner like you, not threatened by her strength." Pearl swallowed past the tightness in her throat. "That's a progressive view, Mr. Harding." "Just an honest one," Mitchell replied. After a pause, he added, "My wife died 7 years ago. Cholera." Pearl turned slightly, surprised by this revelation. "I'm sorry. Were you married long?" 3 years. We were childhood sweethearts." His voice softened with remembrance. "Caroline was kind, gentle. Nothing like the life I've led since losing her." "You've led a hard life," Pearl observed. "So have you," Mitchell countered. "Yet you've remained someone who stops to help a stranger, who risks herself for what's right." He shifted slightly, and Pearl felt his hand find hers in the darkness. "That's rare, Pearl. Rarer than you know." Sleep claimed them eventually, their hands still joined, the barrier of strangeness between them dissolved by shared confidences in the quiet night. They rose before dawn, ready to complete the final leg of their journey to Cheyenne. As they saddled their horses in the gray light of early morning, Pearl noticed Mitchell wincing slightly as he tightened his saddle girth. "Your wound is bothering you," she observed, moving to help him. "It's nothing," Mitchell insisted. "Just stiff from sleeping in an odd position." Pearl gave him a skeptical look, but didn't press the issue. They mounted up and continued southeast, keeping to the shelter of wooded areas where possible. Around midday, as they paused to rest the horses near a small creek, Pearl caught movement on a ridge to the west. Squinting against the sun, she made out the silhouettes of 3 riders scanning the landscape. "Mitchell," she said quietly, nodding toward the ridge. Mitchell followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Fletcher and his friends," he confirmed. "They must have picked up our trail." Pearl calculated quickly. "They haven't spotted us yet. If we cross the creek and head through that narrow canyon, we can lose them and still make progress toward Cheyenne." Without waiting for a response, Pearl led her horse into the creek, keeping low in the saddle. Mitchell followed, and they moved swiftly through the water for several hundred yards before emerging on the far bank and entering the canyon Pearl had indicated. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for their horses to walk single file between the high rock walls. It twisted and turned, eventually opening onto a secluded valley that Pearl knew connected to a series of ravines leading southeast. "How do you know this country so well?" Mitchell asked as they emerged from the canyon. "My father and I used to hunt all through these hills," Pearl explained. "He believed in knowing every inch of land around our ranch, said it might save our lives someday. Seems he was right." They made good time throughout the afternoon, but as dusk approached, Pearl noticed Mitchell's posture sagging, his face pale beneath his tan. When they stopped to water the horses at a small pond, she confronted him. "Let me see your wound," she demanded, approaching him as he leaned against a boulder. "It's fine, just tired from riding," Mitchell protested weakly. Pearl ignored him, unbuttoning his shirt to reveal the bandage beneath. When she peeled it back, she swore under her breath. The wound was red and inflamed, with angry streaks spreading outward. "This is infected," she said grimly. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" Mitchell avoided her eyes. "We can't afford to stop. Not with Fletcher on our trail." "We can't afford for you to die of blood poisoning either," Pearl retorted. She looked around, assessing their location. "There's a homestead about an hour's ride from here. The Carters. Good people who owe my father a favor. We'll go there." Despite Mitchell's objections, Pearl insisted, and as his condition deteriorated, he lacked the strength to argue further. By the time they reached the Carter homestead, Mitchell was feverish and barely able to stay in the saddle. Martha Carter, a sturdy woman in her 50s, opened the door at Pearl's knock, her eyes widening at the sight of Mitchell slumped on his horse. "Pearl Randall. What in heaven's name? He's been shot." Pearl explained quickly. "The wound's infected. We need help, Mrs. Carter. A place to stay where we won't be found." Martha's gaze sharpened with understanding. "Bring him inside. Samuel," she called over her shoulder. "Get out here and help." With the help of Samuel Carter, a burly, bearded man who asked no questions, they got Mitchell inside and onto a bed in a small room off the kitchen. Martha sent her youngest son to fetch their nearest neighbor, who had some medical knowledge, while Pearl removed Mitchell's bandage and cleaned the wound as best she could. Mitchell drifted in and out of consciousness, his skin burning with fever. "The papers," he mumbled, clutching at Pearl's arm. "In my saddlebag. You have to get them to Marshall Davis in Cheyenne." "We will," Pearl assured him, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "Together. Once you're better." Mitchell's eyes, bright with fever, fixed on her face. "Promise me, Pearl. If something happens to me, you'll get them there. People are counting on it, even if they don't know it." Pearl's throat tightened. "I promise. But nothing's going to happen to you, Mitchell Harding. You're too stubborn to die on me now." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Almost as stubborn as you." The neighbor, a grizzled man named Jenkins who had been a field surgeon during the war, arrived as night fell. He examined Mitchell's wound with practiced hands, his expression grave. "The infection's bad," he confirmed. "I'll need to open the wound, clean it thoroughly, and stitch it up again. It won't be pretty." Pearl nodded. "Do what you have to do. I'll help." Mitchell endured the procedure with gritted teeth, refusing laudanum so he could remain alert. Pearl held his hand throughout, her grip firm as Jenkins cut, cleaned, and stitched. By the time it was over, Mitchell was exhausted but lucid, the worst of the immediate danger past. "He'll need rest," Jenkins advised as he packed up his instruments. "And plenty of fluids. Keep the wound clean, change the bandages twice daily. If the fever doesn't break by tomorrow night, send for me again." After Jenkins left, Martha brought a bowl of chicken broth to the sick room. "He needs to eat something," she said, "to keep up his strength." Mitchell tried to take the bowl, but his hands shook violently from weakness and the aftermath of pain. Without comment, Pearl sat on the edge of the bed and took the bowl from Martha. "I can feed myself," Mitchell protested weakly. "Clearly," Pearl replied, echoing their exchange from weeks earlier. She lifted a spoonful to his lips. "Your pride isn't worth starving over, remember?" A tired smile touched Mitchell's face. "Yes, madam," he conceded, allowing her to feed him. As Pearl guided spoonfuls of broth to his mouth, she felt Martha's knowing gaze on them. The older woman smiled slightly before discreetly leaving the room. "The Carters are taking a risk, harboring us," Mitchell said between sips. "Fletcher and his men might trace us here." "The Carters know how to keep secrets," Pearl assured him. "And they have no love for Blackfield. He tried to force them off their land last year." Mitchell's eyes, though tired, remained alert. "There are too many stories like that. Too many people hurt by his greed. And that will end soon," Pearl promised, offering another spoonful of broth. "Once we get your evidence, to the marshal." Mitchell held her gaze. "You still say we," he observed quietly. Pearl's hand stilled, the spoon hovering between them. "I do." "Why, Pearl? Why risk yourself this way for a fight that isn't yours, for a man you barely know?" Pearl considered the question, searching for the truth within herself. "Maybe it is my fight," she said finally. "Blackfield threatened my home, just as he's threatened others. And maybe—" She hesitated, then continued with newfound courage. "Maybe I know you better than you think, Mitchell Harding. I know you're a man trying to make amends for past mistakes. A man with honor, even when it costs him. A man I've come to care for. The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than Pearl had intended. Mitchell reached up, his hand steadier now, and gently touched her cheek. Pearl, he said softly, her name a caress on his lips. I've been half in love with you since I opened my eyes and saw you tending me in your cabin. Every day since has only deepened that feeling. Pearl's heart thundered in her chest. Mitchell, let me finish, he interrupted gently. I have nothing to offer you. No home, no land, not even the certainty that I'll survive what's coming. But if we get through this, I'd like the chance to build something with you. Something honest and good. Pearl set the bowl aside and leaned forward, her lips meeting his in answer. The kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a demand, sweet with the newness of discovered feelings. When she pulled back, Mitchell's eyes were bright with emotion. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured. Pearl smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the small fire burning in the hearth. It's a yes, she confirmed. Now finish your broth and rest. We have work to do when you're stronger. Mitchell recovered more quickly than anyone expected, his natural vitality reasserting itself once the infection was under control. By the third day at the Carters' homestead, he was able to sit up for extended periods and walk short distances. Pearl used the time to scout the surrounding area, watching for signs of pursuit while planning their route to Cheyenne. Samuel Carter rode into town for supplies and returned with troubling news. Blackfield's men are everywhere, he reported as they gathered around the kitchen table. 4 of them in town asking questions, showing Mitchell's description. They've got a substantial reward posted, $500 for information leading to him, dead or alive. Mitchell's jaw tightened. They're desperate. That means we've got them worried. It means they're dangerous, Pearl corrected. And we need to be careful. How far are they looking? Samuel spread a rough map on the table. From what I gathered, they've searched north to Douglas, west to Rollins, and they're working their way south. They haven't come this far east yet, but it's just a matter of time. Pearl studied the map, tracing possible routes with her finger. We need to leave tomorrow, while we still have the advantage. If we take the eastern route through the Laramie Mountains, we can reach Cheyenne in 2 days. That's rough country, Samuel warned, especially for a man recovering from a wound. Mitchell straightened in his chair. I can manage. I've ridden with worse. Pearl gave him a skeptical look, but didn't argue. She had come to respect Mitchell's determination and knew that further delay only increased their risk. They set out before dawn the next day, their saddlebags filled with provisions supplied by the generous Carters. Martha hugged Pearl tightly before they departed. You be careful, girl, she whispered, and bring that handsome cowboy of yours back in one piece. I haven't seen you look at anyone that way since Thomas broke your heart. Pearl blushed, thankful for the pre-dawn darkness. I'll do my best, Mrs. Carter. Thank you for everything. The first day of travel passed uneventfully as they climbed higher into the Laramie Range, following game trails and old Indian paths that Pearl remembered from hunting trips with her father. Mitchell rode steadily, showing no signs of weakness despite the challenging terrain. They made camp that evening in a protected hollow, building a small fire for warmth as the mountain air grew chill. Sitting side by side, sharing a meal of beans and salt pork, Pearl found herself studying Mitchell's profile in the firelight. What are you thinking about? He asked, catching her gaze. The future, Pearl admitted. After Cheyenne, after Blackfield. Mitchell set down his tin plate. And what do you see in this future of yours? Pearl hesitated, then spoke honestly. My ranch. Building it into something substantial. Maybe adding to the herd. Planting an orchard like my mother always wanted. She glanced at him. What about you? What do you see? Mitchell's eyes reflected the dancing flames. For years, I've seen nothing beyond the next day, the next job, the next town. But lately, he took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Lately I've been seeing a home. Land of my own, perhaps. Cattle. A woman with fiery spirit and gentle hands. Pearl's breath caught. That sounds like a good vision. It does, Mitchell agreed softly. Better than any I've had before. They slept that night beneath the stars, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms, the promise of their shared future warming them against the mountain chill. The next day brought clouds and a biting wind as they continued their journey. By midday, rain began to fall, a steady, cold drizzle that soaked through their clothes and made the trails treacherous. "We should find shelter," Pearl called over the increasing wind. "There's a cave system ahead if I remember correctly. We can wait out the worst of it there." Mitchell nodded, pulling his hat lower against the rain. They pressed on, the horses picking their way carefully along the slippery path. As they rounded a bend, Pearl suddenly reined in sharply, raising a hand in warning. Ahead, barely visible through the rain, were 3 riders emerging from a side trail. Even at a distance, Pearl recognized Jake Fletcher's distinctive silhouette. "Back," she whispered urgently. "Quickly, before they spot us." They retreated around the bend, then urged their horses off the trail into a dense stand of pines. Through the trees, they could hear the approaching riders, their voices carrying in snatches on the wind. "Must have gone this way. If we don't find him by nightfall." Blackfield won't accept excuses. Pearl and Mitchell remained motionless, scarcely breathing until the voices faded. When they were certain the riders had passed, they continued in the opposite direction, taking a more circuitous route toward the caves Pearl had mentioned. The cave system, when they reached it, proved to be a series of shallow recesses in a cliff face, offering protection from the rain but little comfort. They unsaddled the horses and secured them in a sheltered area, then gathered what dry wood they could find for a small fire. "They're getting closer," Mitchell observed grimly as they huddled near the meager flames. "We might need to split up. I can lead them away while you take the evidence to Cheyenne." Pearl shook her head firmly. "We're not separating. We're stronger together." "Pearl," Mitchell began, his expression serious, "if something happens to me, nothing will happen to either of us." Pearl interrupted, more sharply than she intended. The thought of Mitchell putting himself at risk, of losing him when she had just found him, sent a spike of fear through her heart. "We'll leave at first light, take the eastern pass, and be in Cheyenne by nightfall tomorrow." Mitchell studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right, together." The rain continued through the night, turning to sleet as the temperature dropped. They slept fitfully, taking turns keeping watch, alert for any sign of pursuit. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a crystalline world of wet rocks and dripping trees. They set out as dawn broke, moving carefully down the eastern slope of the mountains. The going was slow on the rain-slicked trails, but they made steady progress. By mid-afternoon, they had descended into the rolling plains that surrounded Cheyenne. "There it is," Pearl said as they crested a rise, pointing to the sprawl of buildings in the distance. "We should reach it before dark." Mitchell nodded, relief evident in his face. "We made it." As they continued toward the town, Pearl noticed a plume of dust rising from the prairie to the north. "Riders," she warned, pointing. "Coming fast." Mitchell shaded his eyes, counting. 5 of them. Fletcher must have circled around. They urged their tired horses to a gallop, racing toward the safety of Cheyenne. But their mounts, exhausted from days of difficult mountain travel, couldn't match the fresh horses of their pursuers. The gap closed steadily until the sound of hoofbeats could be heard clearly behind them. "They're going to catch us before we reach town," Mitchell shouted over the thunder of their horses' strides. "We need to make a stand. Find defensible ground." Pearl scanned the landscape, spotting a low outcropping of rocks ahead. "There," she called, pointing. "We can hold them off from those rocks." They reached the outcropping barely ahead of their pursuers. Dismounting quickly, they secured their horses behind the rocks and took up positions with rifles ready. Mitchell had just removed his precious documents from his saddlebag when the first shots rang out. "Stay down," Mitchell ordered as bullets whined off the rocks around them. He fired back carefully, making each shot count. Pearl took aim at a rider trying to circle around their position, her rifle cracking sharply. The man tumbled from his saddle with a cry. "Good shot," Mitchell called, firing again and forcing the remaining riders to retreat to a safe distance. For several tense minutes, they exchanged fire with Fletcher's men, neither side gaining an advantage. Then, during a lull in the shooting, Fletcher's voice carried across the distance. "Harding, we know it's you. Throw out those papers, and maybe we'll let the woman live." Mitchell's face hardened. "Don't listen to him, Pearl. Fletcher's word means nothing." "I know," Pearl replied grimly, reloading her rifle. "Besides, I'm a better shot than you are." A ghost of a smile touched Mitchell's lips despite their dire situation. "I don't doubt it. The standoff continued as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the prairie. Pearl knew that darkness would bring both advantages and dangers. They might be able to slip away unnoticed, but they could also be flanked more easily. As she was considering their options, Mitchell suddenly stiffened beside her. "Listen," he whispered. Pearl strained her ears, at first hearing nothing beyond the wind in the grass. Then she caught at the distant sound of hoofbeats, many of them, approaching from the direction of Cheyenne. "Reinforcements?" she wondered aloud. "For which side?" Mitchell countered, his expression grim. They didn't have to wait long for their answer. Around the bend in the road came a group of riders, at least a dozen strong, led by a tall man in a marshal's uniform. Fletcher and his men, caught between two forces, hesitated only briefly before making their decision. They mounted quickly and fled north, disappearing into the gathering dusk. "Mitchell Harding," called the marshal as his group approached the rocks. "Is that you?" Mitchell stood cautiously, his rifle still ready. "Marshal Davis? How did you know we were here?" The marshal dismounted, approaching with a friendly wave. "Got a telegraph from a Mrs. Carter in Granite. Said you were heading this way with evidence against Victor Blackfield, and that his men were in pursuit. Thought you might appreciate some assistance." Pearl rose to stand beside Mitchell, relief washing over her. "Your timing is impeccable, Marshal." Davis tipped his hat to her. "Madam, and you must be Miss Randall. Mrs. Carter spoke very highly of you." Mitchell reached into his coat, producing the packet of documents he had safeguarded for so long. "This is everything, Marshal. Account books, land deeds with forged signatures, sworn statements from witnesses. Enough to put Blackfield away for good." Davis took the packet, his expression serious. "This has been a long time coming, Mitchell. You've done a brave thing here, both of you." He glanced between them. "Let's get you into town. You look like you could use a hot meal and a safe place to rest." In Cheyenne, they were provided rooms at the hotel, while Marshal Davis organized a posse to arrest Blackfield and his remaining men. The evidence Mitchell provided was damning, and telegrams were sent to territorial authorities and the federal judge in Denver. After a proper meal and the luxury of hot baths, Pearl and Mitchell met in the hotel restaurant for breakfast the following morning. Pearl had acquired a new dress from a local shop, and Mitchell had managed to find a clean shirt and have his beard trimmed. "You look beautiful," Mitchell said as Pearl approached his table. "Though I was getting used to you in trousers and covered in trail dust." Pearl smiled, smoothing the unfamiliar skirt as she sat. "Don't get too accustomed to this. Dresses aren't practical for ranch work." "No, I suppose not," Mitchell agreed, his eyes warm as they rested on her face. "Marshal Davis came by earlier. Blackfield was arrested last night at his ranch. Apparently, he didn't go quietly, but no one was seriously hurt. The marshal thinks the case against him is solid." "That's wonderful news," Pearl said, genuine relief in her voice. "So it's over." "Almost," Mitchell replied. "There will be a trial, testimony to give. But the immediate danger has passed." He hesitated, then continued. "I've been thinking about what comes next." Pearl's heart quickened. "And what have you decided?" Mitchell reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I've been offered a position as deputy marshal here in Cheyenne. Davis thinks my knowledge of Blackfield's operation would be valuable." "Oh," Pearl said, trying to hide her disappointment. "That's a fine opportunity." "It is," Mitchell agreed. "But I've decided to decline it." Pearl looked up, surprised. "Why?" Mitchell's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Because my future isn't here in Cheyenne, Pearl. It's wherever you are." His eyes held hers, sincere and steady. "I love you. These past weeks, traveling with you, fighting alongside you, being cared for by you, they've shown me what kind of life I want. A life with purpose, with honesty. A life with you, if you'll have me." Pearl's vision blurred with unexpected tears. "Mitchell Harding, are you proposing to me in a hotel restaurant after knowing me less than a month?" A smile spread across Mitchell's face. "I believe I am. Is it too soon?" Pearl considered the extraordinary journey that had brought them together from a wounded stranger by a creek bed to a partner she trusted with her life and her heart. "Not too soon," she decided. "Just soon enough. Is that a yes?" Mitchell pressed, his smile widening. Pearl leaned across the table and kissed him, not caring about the curious glances from other diners. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes." 3 weeks later, Pearl and Mitchell stood before the minister in the small church in Granite, exchanging vows surrounded by friends and neighbors. Martha Carter wept openly, while her husband Samuel nodded approvingly. Marshal Davis had come from Cheyenne for the occasion, bringing news that Victor Blackfield had been convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 20 years in prison. After the ceremony, they returned to Pearl's ranch, their ranch now, to begin their life together. Mitchell had ideas for expanding the operation, adding to the cattle herd, and possibly breeding horses. Pearl's dream of an orchard was already underway, with saplings planted in neat rows behind the cabin. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Mitchell pulled Pearl close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Pearl nodded, contentment filling her heart. "Very. Though I never expected my life to change so completely because I stopped to help a wounded cowboy." Mitchell chuckled. "I still remember waking up in your bed, barely able to lift my head, and you feeding me soup until my hands stopped shaking." "You were quite pitiful," Pearl teased. "All tall and handsome and completely helpless." "I wasn't completely helpless," Mitchell protested. "Just temporarily inconvenienced by a bullet." Pearl laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "Well, Mr. Harding, I'm glad I found you by that creek, inconvenienced or not." "So am I, Mrs. Harding," Mitchell replied, his voice growing serious. "So am I." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching before them like the vast Wyoming plains, wild and beautiful and full of promise. 5 years later, Pearl stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching as Mitchell taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. The little boy's laughter floated across the yard, mingling with the sounds of the thriving ranch cattle lowing in the distance, chickens clucking in their coop, the rhythmic creak of the windmill that Mitchell had built their second year together. Their daughter, Elizabeth, just 2 years old, clung to Pearl's skirt, her dark curls and blue eyes a perfect blend of her parents' features. At Pearl's feet, Rusty's Sun Scout lay dozing in the afternoon sun. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The cattle herd had tripled in size, and the apple orchard was beginning to bear fruit. They had added a barn, expanded the cabin, and hired 2 steady ranch hands to help with the increasing workload. Word had come just last month that Victor Blackfield had died in prison, his empire long since dismantled and distributed among those he had wronged. The news had brought a sense of closure, the final chapter in a story that had brought Pearl and Mitchell together. As Mitchell lifted James from the pony and swung him high in the air, Pearl felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. She had found not just a partner in Mitchell, but a true companion, someone who valued her strength, matched her determination, and loved her completely. "Mama, look," James called, pointing proudly to the pony. "I didn't fall off. I saw a sweetheart," Pearl called back. "You're a natural, just like your father." Mitchell set James down and crossed the yard to join Pearl on the porch, scooping up Elizabeth as he reached them. "This little one will be riding before we know it, too," he predicted, tickling their daughter until she giggled. "Not too soon, I hope," Pearl replied, leaning into his side. "Let's not rush them into growing up." Mitchell pressed a kiss to her forehead. "No rush," he agreed. "We have all the time in the world." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting golden light across their land, Pearl reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a wounded cowboy too weak to stand and a lonely woman with a pot of soup, to a family built on love, respect, and shared dreams. It was a journey neither had expected, but one that had led them home.